Chapter 23. Jim had never skipped school before, but then he'd never tried to visit someone in jail either, or cook up a plan to track a murderer. It was a day of nerves, a day he would never forget. He wrote a letter to Ruth Rose on the school bus. The writing was jerky, but the message was clear enough. Anyway, he was hoping she would never see it. He was hoping she would see him in person. He imagined a room like in a movie, the two of them sitting on either side of a glass wall with guards at the door in case anybody tried anything funny. By the time the bus pulled into the school driveway, he knew he wasn't going to be able to wait until lunchtime to see her. By lunchtime, he might chicken out. The jail was an historic building attached to the back of the old courthouse on St. James Hill, just a few blocks from the library. He had stared up at the high gray walls and barred windows and imagined dark corridors and grizzled, desperate men in striped pajamas. It was hard to picture Ruth Rose in such a place. And it was his fault she was there. She had wanted to be caught because he had let her down. Inside the front door, there was a stifling small reception area, bare of any furnishings or decoration. There were 3 doors and 1 window with thick glass, bulletproof glass, Jim suspected, which looked into an office. There was only one person in the office. She wasn't in uniform. "Can I help you?" she asked, with a look that suggested she couldn't. Jim bent down to the little talk hole in the glass. "I'd like to speak to one of your prisoners," he said. The woman behind the glass twitched away a smile. "Did you have a particular one in mind?" "Ruth Rose Fisher," he said. "I'm not sure if it's visiting hours yet, ma'am, but it's really urgent." The woman's expression softened. "Well, I'm sorry, but you just missed her. She's gone." Jim's eyes grew wide with surprise. "She's gone away?" The woman nodded vigorously. "Uh-huh. Flew the coop. Some guy came in here with a birthday cake for her, and I guess it must have had a rat-tail file hidden in it." Jim Hawkins, the idiot. "I was just pulling your leg," said the woman good-naturedly. "Ruth Rose was remanded into custody pending her trial." "What does that mean?" "Well, she'd been charged with public mischief, but we're not going to keep her locked up for that. Usually she'd be out under the supervision of a family member. In this case, no one seemed to be available, and Children's Aid wasn't interested. Luckily, someone stepped forward to act as her guardian." "Not a real guardian?" "Well, it's a bit unusual," said the woman, leaning on the counter behind the glass. "But Chief Braithwaite figured it was all right. Anyway, the girl was all for it." "May I ask who took her?" said Jim, as politely as possible. The woman observed Jim closely. He tried to keep eye contact with her, tried not to look like a criminal, hoped she wouldn't ask him why he wasn't in school. "I guess it can't hurt," she said at last. "She left here with Mr. Menzies, the publisher over at the Expositor. How does that sound to you?" "Great," he said. Thank you very much." "Now, don't you go getting her into trouble," said the woman. This time Jim knew enough to smile. He went directly to the newspaper office. Heck wasn't in. He wasn't at home either. He could be anywhere, said Dorothy. There was nothing he could do but go back to school. He signed in late and told the secretary he would bring a letter from his mother the next day. It was difficult getting through the day, and the bus ride home seemed to take forever. Then, when he got home, there was no news. No word from Heck. No word from Ruth Rose. What was going on? Jim tried to help, but his mother shooed him out of the house. "Why don't you go check on those beavers?" she said. "Blow off some steam." He didn't feel like going down to the south pasture, but he did go outside, and then he realized where he really wanted to go. He set off north across the 12th line. He climbed the split-rail fence and headed towards the ridge, towards Old Tabor. Fisher was in hiding, and he was obviously nearby. That was the only explanation for him being on foot the night before. Jim's bet was on Tabor, and if Jim was right, Tabor was the very place Ruth Rose would make for. He could only hope she would tell Heck Menzies about their suspicions. It was hard to imagine her confiding to anyone after what had happened, but just maybe, if Heck told her what he had told Jim, she would open up. And then with any luck, Heck would have told Braithwaite, and there'd be a whole search party already up on the ridge. That's what Jim hoped to find, anyway. The field he crossed belonged to Laura Perkins. It was a line fallow this year, the bare earth hard underfoot despite the rains. There had been a stiff wind, and the going was relatively dry. Jim climbed the sloping field, crossed a raise, and fell out of sight of his mother, or anyone traveling on the 12th that brisk late afternoon. He hopped another fence. Now he was on Purvis Pool's property, a sea of tangled weeds. He slogged on away until he came to the shore of a sea of dunes, the edge of the first sand pit. He jumped down and cut across the pit, his feet sinking into the soggy sand. He had put on his work boots for the climb ahead, but they seemed clunky now, and he wished he had worn his sneakers. Crawling on all fours up the steep northern slope of the pit, he came out on hard pack, a road of sorts, though overgrown and unused. But as he walked, his spirit quickened, for he could see from the broken and leaning grass that something, a vehicle of some kind, had passed through recently. He trampled past Pool's boarded-up house, climbed another hill, forded another sand pit. He climbed out at another distant shore. He was putting continents between himself and his home. He reached at last the place where the rolling meadowland met the bush. He stopped to catch his breath. He turned to look at the valley below, saw the grass bend under the wind. He could see for miles Ormond and Pat McCoy's spread to the east, Laura and Charlotte Perkins' land to the west, his old house tucked nicely into the maples below. If he shielded his eyes against the westering sun, he could even make out Highway 7 to the south and the tall towers of the calcite factory out on the outskirts of Ladybank. He turned to face the road ahead, which stretched steeply before him. It was a narrow gash through the trees, mostly bedrock, fists of granite stuck up through the earth like ancient buried giants turning to fight their way out into the air. The bush closed in on both sides. In a few minutes, Jim's legs ached from the climb, but he looked at the low juniper growing in the nooks and crannies of the roadway. He saw broken branches and bruised clusters of berries where the chassis of something had passed over. He trod lightly, kept his breath a secret between himself and the air. He reached a clearing, a flat plateau stretching in low steps up towards the ridge, which was blocked from his vantage point by dense foliage. Crouching on the edge of the clearing, Jim looked for signs of life. The wind swooped down from the ridge, soughing through the pines, shaking the poplars, bending the saplings. Suddenly, Jim saw a flash, the glitter of light on metal where there shouldn't have been any. It was a car. Not the Godmobile, but a green 4x4 hidden among the trees on the other side of the clearing. No low-sprung city car could have made it up such a rocky incline. Jim watched for signs of movement, saw none. He settled on one knee behind a fringe of high grass, yellow and dry, looking as if autumn had wrung the life right out of it. The 4x4 was a late model Ford Explorer, clean and, to Jim's eye, vaguely official-looking. Department of Natural Resources, maybe? There might be something written on the door. He decided to find out. As patiently and soundlessly as he could, Jim made his way north, around the edge of the clearing. Under the canopy of trees, it was cooler and still wet from the rain of the past few days. He was shivering a bit by the time he came to a track, open to the sky but dense with waist-high sumac, its leaves rust red. The track curved up the hill to his left and disappeared around a bend, heading in the direction of the summit. The ridge loomed above Jim through the wavering trees. To his right, the track curved down towards where the 4x4 must be parked, though it was hidden from view now by a shoulder of land. He waited, watched, listened. The wind snatched away a blue jay's songs, rattled the crows, whistled out of tune through some hollow place Jim could not see. He ventured on all fours into the sumac and poked his head up like a turtle above the red surface of leaves. Northwest a bit, he saw a caved-in shed of some kind. The door opened and slammed shut again, tugged at by gravity one minute and the wind the next, as if there was a stream of ghosts coming and going. Jim headed south down the track towards the ford. He tripped and only just managed to keep his balance. He tripped again, and this time his knee landed hard on steel on a rusted stretch of rail. He was following some kind of narrow rail bed. He came upon the remains of a broken trolley car lying on its side, its metal chassis frozen with rust, its wooden box rotten and moss-covered. Must have been used to transport ore from the mine, he guessed. Keeping low but lifting his feet high, he caught sight at last of the 4x4 below. There was no insignia on the door, but he was close enough and alone enough, as far as he could tell, to risk taking a peek inside. There was a break in the trees that seemed to be the course of a dried-up stream bed. The rails crossed the stony bed on a bridge of stout, rough-hewn timbers, and the stream bed formed a kind of rocky staircase down towards the clearing. Jim sidled down, step by step, through the dappled light until he arrived at last at the vehicle. He stared through his own reflection into the interior, saw nothing at first glance. It seemed showroom clean. He peered more closely. This time he noticed a dark stain on the back seat, a tiny tear in the upholstery revealing a tuft of stuffing. Then he looked again into the front. Lying on the plush leather of the passenger seat was a small white cylinder. Lip balm. He heard a tiny avalanche of gravel and instantly dropped to the ground. Someone was coming from the direction of the cliff. On his stomach, he slithered around a vehicle to the other side. The steps were distant, but not in any hurry by the sound of it, but they were unmistakably coming closer. He looked around. To his left, the ground fell away gently down through a small stretch of open woodland and low ground cover towards the clearing. The clearing was a sprint away. He could probably not escape unseen, but if he could get out into the open, he had a good chance. If it was Fisher, Jim was sure he could outrun him if he had a decent head start. He took another quick look and made up his mind. With a deep breath, he pushed himself off and, keeping low, dashed down through the woods. He had the advantage of surprise. With any luck, he would not be observed until he had made the clearing, and then it was all downhill. No one could catch him. He hadn't counted on the rubble. With lightning reflexes, he cleared the skeletal remains of some kind of steam pump, overgrown and half submerged in the forest floor. He stumbled over a rotten ladder, regained his balance, kept moving. He never saw the flywheel. It was a wooden spoke, as large as a cafeteria table and choked by carrying flour. One moment, Jim was in full stride. The next, he felt a searing pain in his ankle, and he was falling. The last thing he saw was clumps of bluish berries in a putrid-smelling sea of dying vines. The last thing he heard were footsteps thundering in his ears.